Thank you, Dr. Horne. I wanted to go back to something that you've mentioned briefly during the discussion, which was the reaction of the colonized peoples in Asia to the Japanese attack against the British Empire, right? So in the book, you talk about, for example, the experiences of two people who'd become prominent politicians in independent Singapore and Malaysia. So we talk about the reactions of the Lee Kuan Yew, who would eventually become the Prime Minister of Singapore, and also Mahathir Mohamad, right? So about those two characters, you write, and I quote, though present-day Malaysia, so we're talking about 20 years ago, when they were still in office, though present-day Malaysia, with a Malay majority, and Singapore with a Chinese majority, often disagree on many things, it is striking that the prominent figure in Malaysian history, Mahathir Mohamad, agrees with Lee Kuan Yew on the importance of the Japanese Interregnum. It completely changed our world, he said. Not only did the Japanese forces physically oust the British, they also changed our view of the world. He studied Japanese and remains friendly with Tokyo. For those who went to Japanese schools and were willing to learn the language, the Japanese occupation was not too painful. Of course, he adds, people of Chinese origin suffered more and many were killed or held in captivity. But as for himself, he was not violently opposed to the Japanese. He even accepted some key arguments of the Japanese right. Even today, some Japanese will argue that their occupation of Asia was not so much an act of aggression towards the Asian nation as it was an attempt to free us from European colonial rule. There is at least some truth to that argument. The success of the Japanese invasion convinced us that there is nothing inherently superior in the Europeans. They could be defeated. They could be reduced to groveling before an Asian race, the Japanese. So my question is, so how did the Japanese attack on the British Empire embolden non-whites in Asia and around the world? And when you say around the world, we also mean Africans on the continent, in the diaspora. So how did that attack embolden them to confront European colonialism?
Well, first of all, I have to introduce the concept of relativity, which is a concept that perhaps intentionally is not well understood. I mean, for example, I was just talking about my work out here today as we speak on colonialism in what is now British Columbia, the U.S. state of Washington, the U.S. state of Oregon. And I think it's fair to say that the settlers in the United States were much more horrendous in their treatment of the indigenous populations, up to and including genocide. Whereas when you say that, the perhaps insincere critics begin to think that you're giving a pass to British colonialism. No, I'm not giving it. It's a concept of relativity. There is a difference between extractive colonialism, which was exemplified by the Hudson Bay Company here in Canada, whereby they were trying to extract resources, as opposed to settler colonialism, where they now were trying to extract resources. They were trying to wipe out the entire indigenous population. To the point where in this Washington territory, before the state of Washington comes into the Union, they ruled illegal all marriages between European settlers and indigenous. Why, you ask? Because they thought that indigenous women would be spies against the European settlers, and so therefore they could not be marriage partners. Now, that's the context for which we should try to understand Japanese colonialism and imperialism. The Japanese right makes the point that is difficult to argue with, that if you compare present-day South Korea, which of course was a Japanese colony, or present-day Taiwan, the rebel province off the coast of China, which was a Japanese colony, that these are powerful economic engines in 2025. And they would say that that has something to do with the rough rule, to use a euphemism, of Japanese imperialism. Now, compare the Philippines, for example, where the United States took over in the 1890s, at the same time that Japan was taking over Taiwan, for example. And of course, Japan takes over South Korea in 1910. I mean, the Philippines, by way of comparison, is still a kind of slum of Washington. Now, one has to be very careful in making these points, because once again, the insincere critics will accuse you, or accuse me, of giving a pass to Japanese depredations, which is why I'm glad you began our discussion with those opening sentences that I introduced, that I think that trying to understand difficult realities is not easy. And certainly I find it remarkable that in British India, Subhash Chandra Bose, who I talk about in the book, who is an Indian national hero on the level of Nehru and Gandhi, he died shoulder to shoulder fighting with Japanese forces against the British, for example. Not unlike the U.S. Negroes in Washington, D.C. allying with the British when they invaded Washington, D.C. I mean, it's too much to ask people who are oppressed and persecuted to be choosy and picky with regard to who they ally with in order to fight their ultimate foe. And likewise, with regard to Indonesia, the powerhouse of ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, the largest predominantly Islamic country on planet Earth, many of the Indonesian nationalists were like Mahathir, who is still in the land of the living. I think he's about 98 or 99 years old right now, in terms of being pro-Tokyo. Now, what's ironic in the United States and all of these other places is that many of the communist forces with which I am sympathetic, they oppose these sorts of alliances with Japan. And they allied with the British against the Japanese, for example. And of course, Paul Robeson issued polemics in the 1940s against pro-Tokyo Negroes who were espousing the line of the Asiatic black man. But alas, after the war ended, then they became persecuted, for example, by the U.S. authorities. Paul Robeson's income fell from the 6 figures to the low 4 figures, for example. His passport was taken. They attempted to drive him to suicide, for example. So all I'm saying is that these struggles are very difficult, that we're enmeshed in historically and today. And certainly, I think that it's oftentimes useful to revisit these struggles to see if there was another path possible, to see if there was another way to accomplish our goals.